Hey friends, Jason Odell here, and I wanted to do a follow-up of my Nikon 14 to 24 initial impressions video. So I've still got this 14 to 24 S f2.8 S zoom lens, and I got it again from B&H Photo. They were kind enough to loan me this to test. And before I send it back, of course, I want to make sure that I got some chances to use it. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the optical results of this lens with my older 14 to 24 millimeter lens, which was the 14 to 24 2.8 G lens, which is in Nikon F mount. This lens, like I've already mentioned, is a little bit smaller, a newer design, different front element, and both of these lenses are excellent. So let's take a look at my test shots over here in Lightroom so we can get an idea of just if there's any significant differences that we should be worried about. Okay. Let's start off first by taking a look at some shots that I captured with the 14 to 24 2.8S. This is the new Z-mount native fast super wide zoom from Nikon. And what I'm going to do is we're going to just toggle through an aperture series quickly just to look at the light fall off characteristics. Keep in mind that I'm using Lightroom, and Lightroom, it will apply a custom distortion, chromatic aberration, and vignetting profile for this lens. So if you're using a program that isn't Lightroom, that may not apply the automatic corrections, you may see slightly different results. So we'll start with this one. This is wide open, f2.8, and I'm at 14 millimeters. And I'm just going to step through going to f4. You can see that it gets a little brighter, and f5.6, the light fall off is pretty much gone. There's a teeny bit here in the corner if you look really closely between 5.6 and 8. And that's typical of what you see, f11, f16. Let me go back and let's look at the performance wide open. I'm just going to go back and let's zoom in here so that we can see what we're looking at. So we'll look at the corner and edge sharpness as well as the center sharpness. So zooming into my really boring subject here, this looks like you might expect, very sharp. And as we go through, let me see here, step through. Here's f4. Here's f5.6, here's f8, f11, and f16. And f16 you do see a little softening here, which you would expect from a lens like this, because with a 45 megapixel digital camera like my Nikon Z7, which I used here, we would expect to see a little diffraction. So go back to f2.8, very sharp wide open. It gets a little sharper at f4. But really the differences are mostly in the depth of field here. And that's something that you would expect with this lens. And if we go here and just let's do a compare, a side-by-side comparison. So here is, again, we're zooming in. I'm at 200%. This is so you can see it better. So here's f2.8 on the left. Here's f4 on the right. Definitely sharper at f4, but very good at f2.8 wide open, f5.6, f8, f11, and then f16 you start to see a little bit of the softening. So that's cool. Now let's take a look at this same image in the edges of the frame. So I'm going to zoom in here to the edges of the frame and see if we see significant sharpness fall off. Okay, so again, I'm looking at the extreme edges of the frame. It's a little bit soft here at f2.8, especially compared to f4. And then as you go into 5.6 and f8, there's improved sharpness in the edges, but honestly, this is not bad. I mean, what we're seeing here is extremely great edge performance, even wide open with this 14 to 24S. So why don't we compare this to the 14 to 24G? Here are two images, both shot wide open. The 14 to 24 2.8S is on the left side. the 14 to 24 2.8G, the f-mount lens via the FTZ adapter, is on the right-hand side. Just looking at these two shots, they look very similar. Obviously, I was set up on the same tripod. A little bit of unevenness in the sky. This is normal with a super wide lens, and this time of year the sun is low in the sky, but the sun was off to the left here. But it's a little bit more dark and a little more even on the S lens if we look at the top left corner. So let's zoom in on these and compare center sharpness wide open and then edge sharpness wide open. So here's the center. I was focused at the same spot on this fence post in both shots. Again, the Z lens is on the left, the G f-mount lens is on the right. They're both pretty good in the center. I mean, I might give a, that's one of those things where slight error in focusing could be all the difference. So let's scoot over here to the edge of the frame and see how these two lenses compare as we move over to the edge. Okay, at the extreme edge of the frame here is what we're looking at. Again, we do see a little bit of sharpness loss in the Z lens, but it's more pronounced in the G lens. So the edges are sharper, which is kind of what I would have expected for a lens that takes advantage of Nikon's larger Z mount. If we zoom over here to the other edge and let's just see if it's the same thing. Clearly, again, we have the advantage in the edges of the frame in the Z mount, the S lens from Nikon. And again, keep in mind, the 14 to 24G is an excellent lens. It was one of Nikon's best performers on f-mount. What you can see is the new design is really improving. Why don't we take a look and see if there's improvement as we stop down. These two images were captured at f4. Both lenses, again, the 14 to 24S on the left and the 14 to 24G on the right. We can look at center sharpness again at f4. We expect it to be pretty good. Might even be a little bit better. Hard to say with the S lens, but very good overall in both lenses. And if we take a look at our extreme edge of the frame, we'll see again the edge in sharpness. The sharpness has improved somewhat with the 14 to 24G, but now you almost have no sharpness loss in the S lens. So stop down to f4, and we can try this again. Let's look at f8 and see if f8 makes a difference. So here's f8, and we again have the Z mount lens on the left and the F mount lens on the right. We'll let this load in. Center is about the same, very comparable. Let's take a look at the edges of the frame as we go to the edge, the corners. You see the improvement in the G mount at f8. I would still contend that my Z mount lens might be a little bit better. Let's take a look at the other edge of the frame, the right side. And here in this fence post, you can clearly see a difference in sharpness. So what this is telling me is that at pretty much every aperture, the 14 to 24 2.8S is sharper, especially at the edges of the frame, as compared to the predecessor, the 14 to 24 2.8G. We can take a look also at the long end. Let's just look at 24 briefly to see if there's any significant differences there. Here we are at 24 millimeters, wide open, Z lens on the left, G lens on the right. Again, you can see that slight difference in the way the sky is rendered. Let's take a look at sharpness wide open, starting with the center of the frame. Both are very good. Again, I would maybe contend that there's a slight edge here to the S lens, but very good overall. Let's take a look now at the edges where we might see a bigger difference. Here, once again, it's pretty close at 24. I would say the differences are less pronounced than they were at the wide end, but I'm seeing a little bit of an improvement in sharpness. The last thing I really wanted to look at with the 14 to 24 comparisons is flare. The 14 to 24G has this huge bulbous front element on it, and it's kind of known to be a flare machine. Let's take a quick look at the image with the original 14 to 24G, and what you can see is you're going to get a lot of this lens flare in your images. If we look at a bunch of different ones, you see these dots, and in fact this infuriating ghost right there, and those can be really hard to remove sometimes. So we know that, and I was shooting deliberately into the sun. If we go over and now let's take a look at some of the images that I captured with the S lens. So there's directly into the sun, and what you can see is I don't see really any obvious flare in this image. Here's one where I've got the sun in the corner. Now what you're seeing in the upper left is actually a reflection of the sensor pattern, the RGB Bayer pattern on the sensor. But you don't see a tremendous amount of flare anywhere else. I mean, this teeny little bit here in the sun. This was stopped down at f16. You see this nice starburst rendition. Again, another shot, very little flare. Nothing appearing over here in the lower right of the image. So I'm just absolutely amazed by this. Here's where I put the sun just right in almost off the side of the frame. And this was just using the regular lens hood that comes with the 14 to 24 2.8S. Just really doesn't flare. So other than these little sensor patterns that I get when I put the sun directly in the frame, the 14 to 24S absolutely is flare resistant. And that's probably a result of not just the lens design with the more flat front element, but also Nikon's newer lens coatings that they've come out with over the years. So in that head-to-head, there's absolutely no question that the 14 to 24 2.8S is the better performer in terms of flare. So what does all this mean for you, looking out there to buy a lens possibly? Well, what I can tell you is that the 14 to 24 is absolutely outstanding, this new S lens native Z mount for Nikon. And if you don't already have a 14 to 24G and you need a fast zoom super wide, this is really, really excellent. It outperforms its predecessor hands down, both in edge sharpness, it's quieter to focus, and in flare. It absolutely destroys the old G lens in terms of flare. So that's the good news. The bad news is, of course, this has a hefty price tag on it right now. So if you don't need the f2.8 aperture, take a look at the 14 to 30 millimeter f4 Z lens, the f4S, and that lens performs extremely well. In fact, I'll do a comparison with test shots between this lens and the 14 to 30 in an upcoming video. So until next time, I'm Jason Odell, luminescentphoto.com. Thanks again for following me, and I hope to see you online.